The palace of Valoria stood tall on the edge of silver mountains, shining like a dream under the two suns. Its walls were carved from white stone, polished until they sparkled. The windows glowed with crystals that caught the morning light and turned the halls into rivers of color. It was a place meant for peace, wisdom, and royal dignity. But inside there was one storm that never ended. That storm had a name, the Six Twins. Yes, 6 pairs of royal twins. 12 children in total. Each one carried the golden blood of kings and queens, and each one carried an energy that no guard, no tutor, and no law of the palace could control. They were clever. They were mischievous. They were unstoppable. At first, their chaos was charming. When they were little, people laughed at their tricks. The court ministers smiled when they switched seats during lessons, confusing the tutors. The guards chuckled when the children dressed as one another and paraded down the halls. Even the queen herself had laughed softly, her hands covering her lips, when she found her youngest daughters painting the royal throne with berry juice. But as the years passed, laughter turned into sighs. The 6 twins did not grow calmer. They grew sharper, faster, and more daring. Their tricks became disasters. They tied the guards' boots together. They filled the ministers' robes with sand. They released birds into the library, scattering scrolls and books everywhere. There was no limit to their restless energy, and there was no end to their pranks. The palace, once known for order, became a place of endless noise. Tutors came from far kingdoms to teach them. All failed. Some left in tears, some in anger, and some in silence, refusing to return. The guards tried discipline. But what was discipline against 12 sharp minds that worked together? The queen scolded, the king punished, yet still the laughter and tricks continued. And in the middle of it all was one figure, an alien maid named Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra was not from Valoria. She came from a quiet moon far away, a place of gentle lakes and silver fields where life was simple and hearts were kind. She had left her family behind, crossing the stars to find work because her people were poor, and her brothers and sisters needed food. The palace of Valoria had promised steady work and shelter. That was why she had come. She was small, with soft silver skin that shimmered faintly in the light, and deep black eyes that always carried kindness. Her voice was quiet and her steps were lighter than whispers. She had been trained in patience, for in her culture, patience was considered strength. When others grew angry, she stayed calm. When others gave up, she endured. But even Rhaenyra, the patient one, was tested every single day. Her work was simple in name: clean the halls, prepare the rooms, wash the royal clothes, and make sure the palace shone. Yet in truth, her job had become something else entirely, chasing after 12 hurricanes disguised as children. They left food fights in the dining hall. Rhaenyra cleaned the mashed fruit from the walls. They broke vases during their races down the corridors. Rhaenyra picked up the sharp pieces one by one, cutting her hands but never complaining. They tracked mud across polished floors after sneaking into the gardens. Rhaenyra scrubbed the stains until her arms ached. Sometimes, she found herself standing in the middle of a destroyed corridor, her bucket at her feet, her hands trembling, and her eyes wet with tears she would not allow to fall. She whispered to herself, "I must endure. My family depends on me. I must endure." The children did not mean true harm. They did not hate her. But they saw her as part of the palace, part of the background, someone who would always clean after them. They laughed and ran while she worked silently, always behind them, always unseen. One day, after they had poured ink across the library floor, forcing her to spend the whole night scrubbing until her knees hurt, Rhaenyra sat alone in the servants' quarters. The stars shone outside the window, but she did not see their beauty. She felt small, tired, and far away from everything she loved. And still the next morning she rose before dawn. She carried her bucket, her brush, and her weary body into the grand halls once more, because Rhaenyra had promised herself, no matter how much the 6 twins tested her patience, she would not fail. She would not break. Yet in her heart she wondered how long she could last. The next days in the palace proved even harder for Rhaenyra. The 6 twins were growing older, and their imagination seemed to grow with them. No corner of the royal home was safe. One morning, when the bells rang to call everyone to breakfast, Rhaenyra entered the great hall and froze. The long dining table was covered not with food, but with feathers. Hundreds of them. The children had somehow released birds into the kitchen, and the poor cooks had chased them all night. When the birds were finally caught, their feathers had been spread like snow across the table. The queen sighed and sat in silence. The king rubbed his forehead, and Rhaenyra quietly gathered her broom, sweeping feather after feather, her hands moving until her wrists hurt. The children laughed loudly, clapping their hands at their own trick. They were proud of their cleverness, proud of the shock they caused. They never thought about the ones who had to clean afterward. The next day, the twins dressed themselves in the robes of ministers. They sneaked into a council meeting and spoke nonsense in serious voices, confusing half the court. When the real ministers arrived, there was shouting, and once again the palace fell into chaos. Rhaenyra watched it all with tired eyes. She was not angry at them. She could not hate children, not even 12 mischievous ones. But each prank brought more work for her, and each mess left her body weaker. She spent hours picking up fallen papers, scrubbing stained carpets, and mending torn clothes. Sometimes she tried to stop them before the chaos began. Once, when she saw them carrying buckets of water toward the stairwell, she begged softly, "Please, little ones, don't do this. Someone will slip and get hurt." The children only giggled. They poured the water anyway, turning the stairs into a small river. A guard slipped and broke his arm. Rhaenyra spent the night helping clean the mess while the injured guard groaned in pain. Still, no one blamed the twins. They were royal children. They were heirs. Everyone forgave them. Everyone except Rhaenyra's aching hands, except her lonely heart. There were moments when she almost lost her patience. Once, after cleaning mud from the throne room for the 3rd time in a single week, she felt tears burning her eyes. She wanted to shout. She wanted to throw down her brush and run far, far away. But when she imagined her family on her homeworld waiting for the money she sent, she swallowed her cries. "My pain is nothing," she whispered to herself. "Their hunger is worse. I must endure." But the children noticed her less and less. To them, she was like the walls, always there, always silent, always cleaning. They never thanked her, never helped her. They only laughed and ran. One evening, the twins played their cruelest game yet. They pretended to be ghosts, covering themselves in sheets and hiding inside the dark corridors. When Rhaenyra came to place fresh candles, they jumped out, howling and screaming. Her heart nearly stopped. She dropped the candles, and hot wax spilled across her skin, burning her hand. She gasped in pain, clutching her palm while the children laughed and rolled on the floor. For a moment she could not hide her tears. They slipped down her silver cheeks, glowing softly under the candlelight. She turned her face away, ashamed of showing weakness. The children went silent. Their laughter faded. For the first time they saw her not as a quiet maid who would always clean after them, but as a living person who could hurt, who could cry. They did not know what to do. Some shifted uncomfortably. Some stared at the ground. The eldest of the boys opened his mouth, but no words came out. That night, Rhaenyra sat in her small room holding her burned hand. She tried to hide it from the other servants. She whispered again, "I must endure," but her voice was broken, softer than ever. She felt small. Smaller than the stars outside her window. Smaller than a speck of dust on the palace floor. And yet, even in her pain, she did not give up. She rose again before dawn, wrapped her hand in cloth, and carried her bucket and brush into the great hall once more. Because Rhaenyra had made a promise to herself. She would never fail, no matter how much they tested her patience. But deep inside her heart, something fragile was beginning to crack. The days in the palace grew heavier for Rhaenyra. Her silver hands were covered with tiny scars from broken crystal vases, her arms sore from scrubbing floors that never stayed clean. She never complained aloud, but inside her heart the weight was growing. Every morning she woke before dawn. She walked through the echoing corridors with her bucket, her brush, and her soft steps. The palace was quiet in those early hours, filled only with the sound of her breathing. She cherished those moments because once the twins woke up, the storm would begin again. But one evening changed everything. That night, the twins decided to play their cruelest prank. They had grown bored of chasing guards, of painting walls, of scattering papers. Instead, they thought it would be amusing to hide all of Rhaenyra's cleaning supplies. They worked together, whispering and laughing. Buckets, brushes, soap, and cloth, everything she needed was taken and carried across the palace. Finally, they hid it all in the royal fountain, sinking it beneath the cold water and covering it with flowers to disguise the theft. When dawn came, Rhaenyra walked into the storage room and froze. The shelves were empty, her brushes, her buckets, her cloths gone. Her chest tightened. She searched the whole palace, step by step, room by room, until her legs trembled with exhaustion. Hours passed. The sun rose high. Still, she could not find her tools. The children watched from behind pillars, giggling as she walked past again and again. They thought it was only another game. They did not see the sorrow in her eyes. Finally, near sunset, Rhaenyra reached the courtyard and saw the fountain. Her black eyes widened. Beneath the floating flowers, she spotted the faint glimmer of her bucket's metal rim. She knelt, reached into the cold water, and pulled everything out piece by piece. The brushes dripped. The cloths were ruined. The soap had melted into slime. Her hands shook. Her lips quivered. And then, at last, the tears she had held back for so long escaped. She sat on the edge of the fountain, clutching the wet brush to her chest, and cried. Her soft sobs filled the courtyard, a sound the children had never heard before. The laughter died on their lips. They had never thought she could break. To them, Rhaenyra was unshakable, always calm, always silent, always cleaning. They had treated her like part of the palace, like furniture that would never change. But now, for the first time, they saw her shoulders trembling, her silver skin marked with tears. The youngest of the girls whispered, "She is crying." Her voice was filled with guilt. The eldest twin boy swallowed hard. His chest felt tight in a way he did not understand. He had led most of the pranks. He had laughed the loudest. But now all that laughter seemed heavy and wrong. The 12 children stood frozen in silence. None of them moved closer, none of them spoke. They only watched as the maid who had always endured finally broke. That night, Rhaenyra returned to her small room. She sat on her bed, holding her ruined tools. Her family's faces came to her mind, her brothers and sisters waiting for the money she sent home, her mother's gentle smile, her father's tired hands. She whispered, "I must endure." But her voice cracked like glass. She wondered if she could continue. She wondered if her spirit, once so steady, had finally reached its end. The palace halls were quiet that night. No pranks, no footsteps, no laughter. The children did not run. They did not giggle. They lay in their beds, staring at the ceiling, hearing the sound of her sobs echo in their hearts. Something had shifted. Something had changed, and for the first time, the 6 twins began to understand that their endless games carried a cost. The morning after Rhaenyra's tears, the palace was strangely quiet. For months, the halls had been filled with shouting voices, running footsteps, and the sound of mischief. But now silence spread across the marble floors like a soft blanket. The guards looked at one another in confusion. The tutors blinked, waiting for noise that never came. Even the queen paused at her window, wondering why the morning felt so different. And Rhaenyra, carrying her bucket with tired hands, noticed it most of all. She walked into the great hall expecting to find overturned chairs, spilled juice, or muddy footprints. But instead she found 12 children sitting in a row on the long bench. Their heads were bowed, their hands folded. They were quiet, truly quiet, for the first time in memory. Rhaenyra froze. Her heart skipped. For a moment she thought perhaps she was dreaming. The eldest twin boy lifted his eyes. His voice, usually so loud and full of laughter, was soft now. "We are sorry, Rhaenyra," he said. Her black eyes widened. She stood still, not sure if she had heard correctly. The boy's twin brother spoke next, his words stumbling. We did not know. We thought it was only a game. We never thought you could hurt." The youngest girl, with curls that always bounced as she ran through the palace, slid off her seat and walked to Rhaenyra. She held a small flower in her hand, clumsy and crushed, but she offered it with trembling fingers. "Don't cry again," she whispered. "Please." Rhaenyra's chest tightened. She wanted to believe their words, but she had been tested so many times before. Part of her heart was afraid it was only another trick, another game to laugh at. Yet as she looked at their faces, she saw no mischief. No sparkle of planned chaos. Only guilt and something even deeper, fear. Fear that they had gone too far. Fear that they had broken something precious. She knelt slowly, her knees brushing the polished floor, and looked at the little girl holding the flower. With a gentle smile, she accepted it. "Thank you," she whispered. The girl's eyes filled with tears of relief, and she ran back to her seat. For a long moment, Silence held the great hall. The queen entered then, her royal gown trailing behind her. She stopped when she saw the scene. Her sharp eyes softened. She had scolded her children many times, yet never had they looked so still, so humbled. "Something has changed," she murmured. That day the palace remained peaceful. No traps, no running, no laughter that shook the walls. Rhaenyra went about her work, waiting for chaos, but it never came. The children followed her with their eyes, watching her quietly. At first she felt uneasy. She was so used to chasing after them, to cleaning the mess they left behind, that silence felt like another trick waiting to explode. But as hours passed, she realized it was not a trick at all. When she carried heavy laundry to the courtyard, the eldest boys came forward. Without speaking, they lifted half the weight from her arms. Their hands fumbled, nearly dropping the clothes, but their effort was real. When she scrubbed the long steps leading to the garden, 2 of the girls knelt beside her. Their brushes scraped awkwardly, leaving patches untouched, but their small faces were serious. And when she returned to the kitchen, she found the younger twins trying to wash dishes. Soap bubbles covered their faces and clothes, and more plates slipped than were cleaned, but still they smiled shyly at her. Rhaenyra's lips curved into something she had almost forgotten, a laugh. A soft, genuine laugh that spilled from her heart. The children's eyes lit up. They had heard her voice before, but they had never heard that sound, never seen that smile. It was a turning point. They did not need another scolding. They did not need stricter guards or harsher punishments. What they had needed all along was to see her not as part of the palace, not as a silent shadow who cleaned after their fun, but as a living heart who could hurt and also forgive. And in that moment they began to learn. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains and the crystals in the windows turned golden, Rhaenyra walked through the quiet halls. Her steps were lighter than they had been in months. For the first time she felt the storm was fading. The palace was still the same, yet it felt different, softer, warmer, and filled with a hope she had not dared to believe in before. The next morning, Rhaenyra expected the palace to return to its old ways. She thought the quiet day had only been a passing moment of guilt. She feared that the 6 twins would forget her tears and fall back into their endless mischief. But when she stepped into the great hall with her bucket and brush, the 12 children were waiting for her. They were not shouting, not laughing, not running. They stood in a line, their eyes fixed on her. The eldest boy stepped forward. His voice was still soft, almost uncertain. "Can we help you today?" Rhaenyra blinked. She had never heard those words from them before. For a moment she simply stood in silence, her heart unsure whether to believe. Then, slowly, she nodded. The children followed her into the corridor, where muddy footprints stained the marble floor. Normally she would scrub each step on her hands and knees, but today, 12 little hands reached for brushes and cloths. Their work was clumsy. One boy spread mud even further instead of cleaning it. A girl spilled half the bucket of water on herself. The youngest twins fought over who held the bigger brush. But still they tried. Their small faces were serious, their brows furrowed as if this work was the greatest mission they had ever known. And as Rhaenyra watched, something stirred in her heart. For the first time she did not feel alone. Later that day she carried heavy baskets of laundry through the courtyard. Usually her arms ached by the time she reached the washing lines. But this time the elder twins rushed to her side. They lifted half the weight, grunting and staggering, nearly dropping the clothes, but their effort was real. "Careful," she whispered with a smile. "Hold it steady." They looked up at her, surprised by her gentle tone, and nodded quickly. In the kitchen, 2 of the younger children dipped their hands into soapy water, washing plates with far too much energy. Bubbles covered their arms, their cheeks, even their hair, until they looked like walking clouds. Rhaenyra could not hold back her laughter. It was not mocking. It was warm, light, and filled with something she had almost forgotten. Joy. The children froze, then smiled. They had never heard her laugh like that. To them, it was brighter than any treasure. As the days passed, the palace began to change. The 6 twins still had their endless energy, but now it was guided. Instead of scattering feathers across the hall, they helped polish windows until they shone. Instead of painting the throne with berries, they painted pictures on scraps of cloth and proudly showed Rhaenyra their art. Of course, chaos still followed them. Dishes slipped and shattered. Floors ended up wetter than before. The garden became a mess of crookedly planted flowers. But for the first time, the mess was not born of mischief. It was born of effort, and Rhaenyra found herself smiling more often than frowning. One evening, as the suns lowered behind the mountains, the queen walked through the palace gardens. She stopped when she saw her children kneeling in the dirt, their hands muddy, their clothes untidy but their faces bright with pride as they worked beside Rhaenyra. The queen's eyes softened. She had ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, and spoken to leaders across the stars. Yet none of her wisdom had tamed her children. It was the quiet alien maid, the one who never raised her voice, who had found a way. Later, the king too noticed the change. He watched his children carrying baskets of fruit, struggling but laughing together with Rhaenyra. His stern face melted into a rare smile. Word spread quickly through the palace. Servants whispered, guards nodded in approval, and tutors dared to return. Everyone spoke the same words. The maid has done what no one else could. She found a way, but Rhaenyra never claimed credit. When others praised her, she only bowed her head and said softly, "They are good children. They only needed to feel useful." And in her heart she realized something deeper. Patience had not been enough. Endurance had not been enough. What the children needed was love, the quiet kind that showed them they mattered, that their hands were not only for trouble but also for creation. That night, as the stars filled the sky, Rhaenyra sat by her small window. For the first time in many months, her body did not feel so heavy. Her heart was warm. She whispered, "Maybe I am not as alone as I thought." And she smiled, knowing the 6 twins were no longer just her burden. They were slowly, clumsily becoming her companions. The days turned into weeks, and slowly the palace of Valoria became a different place. The storm of noise that once shook its marble halls was no longer wild destruction. It was laughter mixed with purpose. The 6 twins still carried their endless energy, but now it flowed in a new direction. They began with the gardens. What was once a place of broken branches and trampled flowers became a living painting. Rhaenyra guided their hands, showing them how to plant seeds and water them with care. At first, the rows were crooked and the soil spilled everywhere. But little by little, green sprouts rose from the earth. The children's eyes widened when the first blossoms opened. They had created life with their own hands. "Look, Rhaenyra," the youngest cried, holding up a small purple flower. "It's growing." Her gentle smile warmed them more than the suns above. "Yes," she whispered, "because you gave it love." Soon the gardens bloomed with colors brighter than any jewels in the palace treasury. Servants passing by stopped to admire the sight, shaking their heads in wonder. None of them could believe it was the work of the once troublesome twins. After the gardens, the children turned their energy to the palace itself. The tall crystal windows, once covered with smudges and dust from their games, now sparkled. The twins polished them with eager hands, laughing at their own reflections. The corridors that had echoed with chaos now shone with light. One afternoon, Rhaenyra entered the throne room and gasped softly. The children had arranged flowers, cloths, and even candles into a beautiful display. It was uneven, clumsy, and far from perfect, but it filled the hall with warmth. The throne, once a target of pranks, now stood as the center of their effort. The queen entered behind her and stopped, her eyes wide. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she turned to Rhaenyra and whispered, "You have changed them." But Rhaenyra only bowed her head. "No, Majesty. They changed themselves. I only showed them how." The king, too, noticed the transformation. Where once he heard complaints from guards and ministers, now he heard stories of the twins carrying water, delivering messages, and helping servants. Their clumsy efforts often caused more work than help, but no one minded. For the first time, the royal children were trying to give instead of take. The climax came when the children decided to create something for their parents. Together they planned a play to perform in the Great Hall. They argued, stumbled, and forgot lines, but their hearts were united. Rhaenyra helped them sew costumes from old cloth, and she guided their voices with patience. On the night of the performance, the queen and king sat side by side, their crowns shining in the candlelight. The hall was filled with ministers, servants, and guards, all curious to see what chaos might unfold. But when the curtain of cloth was pulled aside, 12 children stood tall and proud. They acted clumsily but with passion, telling the story of a kingdom saved not by armies or gold, but by kindness. They laughed, they cried, they stumbled, but they finished together, bowing as one. The hall erupted in applause. The queen's eyes glistened with tears, and even the king, who rarely showed emotion, clapped until his hands were red. Rhaenyra sat in the front row, her black eyes glowing softly. The children looked to her first, searching her face for approval. She gave them a smile brighter than any jewel, and their hearts lifted. From that day, the palace was no longer just a place of duty and burden. It became a place of joy. Ministers no longer dreaded coming. Guards no longer begged for reassignment. Even the servants found their work lighter, for laughter made heavy tasks easier. And in every corner, people whispered the same truth. It was the alien Maid. She did what no one else could, but Rhaenyra never sought glory. To her, it was enough that the children had found a new path. She knew their journey was not perfect. They would still make mistakes, still cause trouble, but now their mischief carried the light of love, not carelessness. At night, when she returned to her small room, she no longer whispered, "I must endure." Instead, she whispered, "I belong," for the Palace of Valoria was no longer just her place of work. It was becoming her home. The Palace of Valoria had changed. Where once the marble halls rang with mischief and noise, now they carried laughter mixed with purpose. The six twins were still energetic, still restless, but they had discovered something new, how much joy could be found in giving instead of breaking. Rhaenyra felt the difference most of all. Her hands no longer trembled with endless work. Her steps no longer dragged through the corridors. Each day she was joined by 12 pairs of small feet, eager to follow her, eager to help. They still made mistakes, spilled water, crooked rows, broken plates, but they tried, and that effort warmed her heart more than perfection ever could. Yet the greatest change was not in the palace's walls or gardens. It was in the children's hearts. They had begun to see Rhaenyra not as a maid, not as part of the background, but as someone who mattered, and soon, they wished to show her what she had become to them. One evening, the sons of Valoria dipped low, painting the sky in gold and crimson. The palace was quiet, but in the great hall, 12 children worked secretly. They whispered and giggled, carrying flowers from the gardens, ribbons from the storage rooms, and scraps of cloth from the servants. Their small hands moved with excitement, their eyes shining with determination. Rhaenyra, meanwhile, was in the courtyard finishing her duties for the day. She looked up at the glowing sky, feeling a peace she had not known since leaving her homeworld. For the first time, she no longer felt like a stranger. She felt needed. When she returned to the hall, she stopped in surprise. The floor was covered with petals. Candles flickered in every corner, and in the center stood the six twins holding something in their hands. The eldest boy stepped forward. His voice trembled, but it carried pride. "Rhaenyra," he said, "we made this for you." From his hands he lifted a crown woven from flowers, clumsy, uneven, but filled with care. "You are not just our maid," his sister added, her eyes glistening. "You are our family." Rhaenyra froze. Her silver skin seemed to shimmer under the candlelight, and her black eyes filled with tears. She had come here as nothing more than a worker, far from her family, far from her home. She had endured their tricks, their chaos, their cruelty because she had no choice. Yet now these same children who once tested her patience were calling her something greater: family. Slowly she knelt before them. The children placed the flower crown gently on her head. Her tears fell freely now, but her smile was brighter than ever. "My little ones," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You have given me the greatest gift. I thought I was alone, but now, I know I belong." The children rushed forward, wrapping their arms around her. It was clumsy, messy, and too tight, but it was real. Rhaenyra's arms closed around them in return, holding them as if they were her own. The queen and king watched from the doorway, silent witnesses to the scene. The queen's eyes shone with pride, and the king for once let his stern face soften into warmth. They had long struggled to guide their children, but it was the quiet alien maid who had shown them the way, not with power, not with scolding, but with patience, kindness, and love. From that day on, the Palace of Valoria carried a new story. People whispered not only of the six twins, but of the maid who tamed their storm. Yet the truth was deeper. She had not tamed them at all. She had simply shown them that their hearts were capable of more than trouble, that they could love, create, and cherish.